So today we're going to talk a little bit about basic nutrition and some protein supplementation. My name's Molly Float. I'm a territory sales manager for MLS. So a couple little things that we're going to talk about today is what makes a cow special, some basics on feeding the rumen, and also some proteins. But first, I have a video to show you.
What in the hell was that all about?
So we may be wondering why in the world we have Chris Farley rolling down a hill. The whole purpose is just to see that sometimes we might feel this way through this presentation. There's a lot going on, but it's okay. Chris made it down the hill in one piece, so we will make it through this information in one piece as well. So monogastrics and ruminants, monogastrics are such as pigs and ourselves. We're simple stomach animals. All of our digestion is done in our stomach and then absorbed in our small intestine. We do have some not us having rumen bacteria, but we do have some bacteria in our gut, but they work a little bit different than a cow. So that's what makes a ruminant and a cow so very special. So always people have thought, well, cows have four stomachs. Actually, they have one stomach, four compartments. And what makes them special is they can utilize high fiber diets. So think of us on trying to eat celery all the time. We don't get a lot from it. So, hence, it's a diet food. Now, if you feed cows celery, because of the high fiber content, they're going to get something out of it. So that's what's very, very special about cows is the higher fiber. They can digest it, and it's all because of the bacteria in the gut. So of course we have the four compartments of the stomach: the reticulum, rumen, omasum, and abomasum. The reticulum is that little part where heavy particles are going to fall into, such as if there's nails or rocks or stuff like that. They'll go into the reticulum first. The reticulum sits close to the heart, so if we have some issues with some hardware disease, that's going to be because there's a nail or something poking through the reticulum right next to the heart, which can cause some issues and sometimes more than likely death to the animal. We're going to focus on the rumen, of course, because that's where all the fun stuff happens. The omasum and abomasum are parts of the stomach that are more acid digesting parts. So especially the abomasum, it's very, very similar to our stomach. So in the rumen, that's where all the microbes are at. They do all the heavy lifting. And then the microbes eventually are digested in the abomasum and the small intestines. So they still will have a part and do a lot of good things for the cow, even as we go through the digestive tract. The cool thing about the microbes is the animal would starve to death without them. So the microbes supply up to 70% of the animal's energy and protein needs. So we must have the bugs. We must take care of them. They have the ability to synthesize amino acids. And the cool thing about amino acids is they're just the building block of proteins. So it's the nitrogen portion that they will need. That's the important part to remember here. So within the rumen, if we wanted to see what was alive in there, we'd pull a little portion out, and this is just looking at a 1 cc or 1 millimeter or the very tip of your thumb. This is the amount of population of wildlife, I guess you could say, or the microbes that you would find in there. There's 10 billion bacteria, 1 million protozoa, and 10,000 fungi. And all of these little critters are digesting the feedstuffs that you feed. So the hay, silage, the supplement that you're giving, these little guys are doing all the work for the cow. One other thing we need to remember is, yes, the microbes are alive. They do have their own nutrition needs as well. So we have different microbes that do different things. So cows on grass, even if they're hay, they have to have fiber digesters. Cattle in the feedlot, they're going to have a starch digesting bacteria. So that is why cattle going into the feed yards, especially during the weaning process and going from background yards to finish yards, we have to change their diet slowly because the population of the microbes need to change. They do still need a source of nitrogen, such as urea, just because of the nitrogen portion, because that's what makes the protein. There's different kinds also within that is we have degradable and undegradable proteins. And I will be talking a little bit more about that as we go. And also the other thing, the microbes do need a source of minerals as well, just not just the cows, the microbes also are needing copper, zinc, calcium, and phosphorus, such as the other minerals. So, what is the ideal rumen pH and why is this important? It's important due to the simple fact is it has to do with supplementation. It has to do with how we're feeding them. So the common rumen pH is 6.2 to 6.6. If we get below this, and especially if cows are out on grass, we can have some digestive upsets such as acidosis. So if it drops below these two, we're killing off the bacteria that do all the digestion. So think of your cow. If she gets out and gets into the shed and eats a whole bag full of corn, the rumen pH is going to drop. It's going to kill off all those bacteria because they're fiber digesters. There's no hardly any starch digesters at all. We get acidosis, and if we don't get it taken care of and neutralize the rumen pH, we're probably going to lose that animal. So it's very, very important to keep this in mind. And the other important part of this is animals are, and especially ruminants, they're snack eaters. So they'll eat little bits and pieces of supplement all the time. And the key point I want to make here is usually when we get below 8% protein, we're needing to supplement the rumen. And why we need to do this is because the rumen pH will just it gets stagnant. It doesn't move, it doesn't change. So the more feed you're feeding her, the bugs can't take care of it because there's not enough nitrogen. So they can get plugged up and have issues there and get impaction. So cows have actually starved to death standing in very tall grass and feed because it was not the ideal crude protein. And also, we had no protein supplementation to take care of those bugs. So the important piece here is showing that we do know that cows will go to a tub several times a day. And when they're going to that tub several times a day, the red line represents how their pH, their rumen stays pretty steady. So let's say that the dotted line is if you feed some cake in the morning, and then let's say we go and feed some alfalfa hay or another dose of cake in the evening. We have these weird changes in pH spikes. So sometimes we're killing off some bacteria and then they got to start again. We want to try to keep this pH in this rumen more constant because then we know the bugs are able to do what they need to do. So now let's dig into protein a little bit. So protein is a very large molecule. There's lots of them out there. I don't expect everybody to know that, but I want you to always remember that the main component of protein is a ammonia or a nitrogen. It's building blocks, amino acids, building blocks of protein. So no matter what kind of protein you're feeding the animal, all the bugs want is just the nitrogen because they're going to make their protein that they want. So there's two kinds of proteins. There's degradable and undegradable proteins. So undegradable proteins real easy. It bypasses the rumen. The rumen bugs get no benefit from this protein, but it will get digested in the abomasum in the small intestines. So the cow herself will get some use out of this protein. The one thing we always remember in supplementation is sometimes it takes both kinds of proteins to make stuff work. So you do want a good source of degradable and undegradable protein in a supplementation program. So, digestible intake protein. This is the one that the bugs want. They're going to take all those nitrogens apart and make their own protein. So, the most common one is NPN, such as urea, and we'll talk about a little bit of urea here in just a little bit. The important part I want you guys to remember is using NPNs. It helps with the cost. It brings more protein in, and it also can decrease the cost. So undegradable protein, like I said, it passes through the rumen. It's digested in the lower parts of the tract. Most commonly known as bypass proteins, and dry distillers grains are a very, very common source of undegradable intake protein. So natural proteins. So natural proteins are most of the time plant-based proteins, such as sunflower meal, canola meal, dry distillers grains, and yes, I have feather meal here because feather meal is a true protein. It's a natural protein. It's not something man-made or created. A lot of times if you look at our labels on the tubs, it does say plant protein products, and it's usually because we can use a combination of, let's say we're using some sunflower meal and some canola meal, just kind of depending on location. And within the labeling requirements, you don't necessarily have to specify exactly which protein you're using unless you're using, feather meal. We'll have to put that. But if you're using a combination of different plant-based protein products, it can be lumped as a plant protein product. So next, we're going to look at feather meal. Feather meal sometimes gets a bad rap just because of some old stigmas out there. There are limitations on how much feather meal you can put into a product without causing some issues. The cool thing about feather meal is it's pretty cost effective. And look at it, guys, it's 86% crude protein. So it's a great source of protein. It is used. It it's very digestible in the rumen, so the bugs love feather meal just because it's got all of these different nitrogen pieces that they want. It's great product to mix with different kind of proteins to make a good mix for your proteins, and it will also help with some cost. So soybean meal, it's 44% protein. It's very digested in the rumen, so it's a great source of protein. So it is also a natural protein. So next we have cottonseed meal. It's very similar to soybean meal, where soybean meal was 44% protein. This one's 45. It is also very well degraded in the rumen, great source of protein. Just kind of depending on location, you're going to maybe see more cottonseed meal than soybean meal. It just kind of depends on where ingredients are pulled and cost effectiveness. So now we're going to look at NPN. NPN are proteins that are not true proteins, not found in nature. Most of the time, they're man-made. The biggest one out there is urea. It's 46% protein, which is a lot of protein. And if we think about it, it's about 288% crude protein. So the difference there is crude proteins, the total protein that can be available. It did get a bad rap in the 80s because of liquid feed. There was lots of dead animals just because it wasn't positioned right, and everybody got really excited. Liquid feed, lots of protein. But we got to remember, if we're using urea, we have to make sure that the animals have feed. So if you're feeding a tub that has 20% NPN and you have absolutely nothing for that animal to eat, it is not a good idea to be feeding that type of protein. They have to have an energy source, they have to have feed available. So be very careful when you're feeding a tub with some urea in it, especially if you have very low quality forages or little feed resources available. So when we're working with customers that are in all natural feeding programs, we need to make sure that you know their program. There are times when urea can be allowed. There's times when feather meal can be allowed in certain programs. Not all programs are created equal. You just need to make sure that you and your customers know that program so you get the right products into their feeding program. So the keys to remember is we have to feed the bugs. That's the important part of a rumen. There are different protein sources out there, and within these protein sources, the bugs, they make the energy for the cow. So it's very, very important that we feed the rumen. Just remember, not all proteins are created equal. You have digestible and undigestible protein, and you need a good source and a good balance of those. And just remember, there's different combinations of proteins available.